All right, get ready, because today we are really going to dive deep into decolonization. Like way deeper than usual. Going way beyond those like simple textbook definitions,
Yeah.
Country gets its independence, roll the credits, the end.
Yeah.
Like we're talking about a global shift in power, culture, everything.
Yeah.
You sent over some amazing sources, by the way.
Glad to hear it.
I have to say,
Yeah.
even just the images are powerful. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
chained books, open jail cell doors.
Powerful.
It really hits you.
I think those images really capture the essence of this complex process.
Yeah.
They remind us that decolonization isn't just about raising a flag or having some kind of ceremony. It's about people reclaiming their history, their stories, their very identity. It's about breaking free from centuries of imposed narratives and systems of oppression.
Okay, so you use the phrase imposed narratives.
Yes.
What exactly does that mean in the context of decolonization?
Well, think of it this way. Imagine a library where all the books about a certain culture are written by outsiders,
Okay.
often with a biased lens, and then those books are chained shut, preventing access to the authentic narratives.
Right.
Decolonization is about breaking those chains, giving people the power to write their own stories, to define their own cultures and histories.
So it's about shifting who gets to tell the story.
Exactly.
Who gets to define the narrative.
Absolutely. It's about challenging the dominant narratives that were often used to justify colonization in the first place.
Okay.
Narratives that portray colonized people as somehow inferior.
Right.
Their cultures as primitive, their histories as insignificant. Decolonization disrupts those narratives and allows for a more truthful, more multifaceted understanding of the world.
And this wasn't just like one corner of the world, right?
Yeah.
Like our sources show decolonization was like a tidal wave.
It really
A
was.
global movement.
The 20th century saw decolonization sweeping across Asia, Africa, the Americas, the Caribbean, really touching every corner of the globe that had experienced colonial rule.
Wow.
But here's where things get interesting.
Okay.
Each region, each nation experienced decolonization in its own unique way.
So not every country followed the same path to independence.
Exactly. The timelines, the methods, the challenges, even the ultimate outcomes, they varied wildly. Take Algeria, for example. Their fight for independence from France was a brutal 8-year war.
Wow.
A stark contrast to India, where Gandhi's philosophy of nonviolent resistance paved the way to freedom.
That is a powerful comparison.
It is.
So decolonization wasn't just about achieving like political independence.
Yeah.
It was also deeply intertwined with these like different approaches, these ideologies and struggles.
Precisely. And it wasn't just about politics either.
What do you mean?
It's impossible to separate decolonization from the social and economic realities of the time. Think about that image of the open jail cell door.
Yeah.
It represents a yearning for freedom.
Where?
But not just freedom from political control.
Okay.
People were also fighting for freedom from economic exploitation.
Right.
From social injustices that were, deeply rooted in those colonial systems.
So decolonization wasn't just about changing who was in charge.
Exactly.
It was about changing the whole system.
The whole system.
The way resources were distributed, the way society was structured.
Yeah, people were demanding control over their own resources.
Right.
A fair share of the wealth that had been extracted from their lands during colonial rule.
Right.
And this desire for economic justice was often deeply intertwined with social movements.
Okay.
With the fight for equality and dismantling of those oppressive social hierarchies.
So it was this multifaceted movement, a fight for freedom on multiple fronts.
It was.
But what about the aftermath?
Yeah.
Did achieving independence magically solve all the problems created by colonialism? I'm guessing not, based on what I'm seeing in these sources.
You're right. Achieving independence was a monumental step.
Sure.
But it certainly wasn't a magic cure-all.
Okay.
Decolonization didn't erase the scars of colonialism overnight.
Right.
In fact, many newly independent nations found themselves facing a whole new set of challenges.
Like what? What kind of challenges?
Well, for starters, there was often a struggle to establish stable political systems. After decades, sometimes centuries, of colonial rule.
Yeah.
Many former colonies found themselves grappling with internal conflicts,
Right.
power struggles, weak institutions.
So the transition to self-governance wasn't always smooth sailing.
Not at all.
Okay.
And then there were the economic challenges.
Right.
Many former colonies had economies that were heavily reliant on their former colonizers.
Yeah.
often focused on exporting raw materials
Sure.
rather than developing diversified industries. This left them vulnerable to global market fluctuations
Right.
and often led to continued economic dependence,
Yeah.
even after political independence.
So it sounds like decolonization, while a victory in many ways,
It was a victory.
also created this whole new set of problems
It did.
for newly independent nations to tackle.
Absolutely. And we can't forget about the social divisions that were often exacerbated by colonialism.
Oh, right, right.
You know, ethnic tensions, religious conflicts,
Right.
social inequalities. These issues didn't disappear with independence.
Right.
In many cases, they were intensified
Yeah.
by the power vacuums and political instability that followed.
So even though decolonization brought about this huge wave of political change,
It did.
it didn't magically erase the complex legacies of colonialism.
Exactly. And that brings us to a crucial point.
Oh.
Decolonization isn't just a historical event.
Right.
It's an ongoing process. It's a journey. And like any journey, it's full of twists and turns, setbacks and triumphs.
You're saying that even though many nations gained independence decades ago, the work of decolonization, that deeper, more fundamental shift in power and perspective,
Right.
is still happening today.
Absolutely. Decolonization is about constantly challenging the lingering effects of colonialism in all its forms. Political, economic, social, and cultural.
Okay.
It's about deconstructing those imposed narratives,
Yeah.
dismantling oppressive systems,
Okay.
and building a world where every nation and every individual has the right to self-determination.
And that right to self-determination, that seems to be a core concept here.
It is.
The beating heart of decolonization.
Self-determination is the inherent right of a people to freely determine their own political status and to pursue their own economic, social, and cultural development.
So it's not just about getting rid of the colonizer.
It's not.
It's about taking control of your own future,
Yes.
your own identity as a people.
Precisely. And that's why decolonization is still so relevant today.
Okay.
It's not just a chapter in a history book.
Right.
It's a living, breathing process happening all around us.
So if we think about it that way, decolonization isn't just about the past.
No.
It's about the present and the future, too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that the legacies of colonialism continue to shape the world we live in. And it's about actively engaging in the process of dismantling those legacies and building a more just and equitable future.
This is already so much to think about.
It is.
I feel like we've covered a lot of ground in terms of defining decolonization.
They have.
But I'm curious to hear more about specific examples of how this played out in different parts of the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In our next segment, we'll take a closer look at some key decolonization movements across different regions,
Okay.
exploring their unique challenges and triumphs.
Sounds good.
We'll also examine the role of international organizations and global power dynamics in shaping the decolonization process.
Can't wait to hear about those specific cases.
Yeah.
And for you listening, think about this. How has decolonization, whether you realize it or not, already touched your own life, your community, the way you see the world? We'll be back with more in just a bit.
Welcome back to our deep dive into decolonization.
Okay.
As promised, we're going to kind of shift gears a bit and explore.
So the war created this opening, this
Yeah.
opportunity for colonies to push for independence.
Exactly. And one of the most iconic examples of this is India's independence in 1947.
India.
It wasn't just about ending British rule.
Right.
You know, it was about the resurgence of a civilization, a culture that had been suppressed for centuries.
India's independence was huge. It was like a turning point in history, right?
Absolutely. And figures like Mahatma Gandhi,
Gandhi.
with his philosophy of nonviolent resistance, became global symbols of the decolonization struggle.
Yeah.
Gandhi's approach inspired movements around the world, proving that resistance didn't always have to mean violence.
That's fascinating.
It is.
Showing how deeply interconnected all these movements were, how they learned from each other and inspired each other.
Right.
But our sources also mention the partition of India and Pakistan.
Yes.
A very tragic and violent event.
Very much so. The partition, while marking the end of British rule, also led to one of the largest mass migrations in human history. And a level of violence that left a lasting scar on the region.
Wow.
It's a stark reminder that decolonization, even when successful, doesn't always lead to a neat and tidy resolution.
Right, so even in achieving independence,
Yeah.
the legacy of colonialism in this case, the way the British had divided the region, continued to have consequences.
Exactly.
It makes you think about how those arbitrary lines drawn on a map by colonial powers still have such a profound impact on people's lives today.
You've hit on a crucial point. The drawing and redrawing of borders by colonial powers without regard for existing ethnic, religious, or cultural ties created lasting tensions and conflicts in many parts of the world, and we see similar patterns in Africa, where the push for decolonization gained tremendous momentum in the 1950s and 60s.
Africa's decolonization was another turning point in history, wasn't it?
It was. It was a period of immense upheaval and change, with each nation forging its own path to independence. The struggle against European powers varied greatly across the continent, from peaceful negotiations in some cases to protracted armed struggles in others.
I remember reading about the Algerian War of Independence.
Yes.
In one of the sources you sent, that was particularly brutal, wasn't it?
It was. The war, which lasted for 8 long years.
8 years.
Is a stark example of the lengths to which colonial powers were willing to go to hold on to their territories.
Wow.
You know, it also highlighted the deep-seated resentment and resistance that had been building within those colonized populations.
So it's a reminder that while political independence was a key goal,
of course,
decolonization in Africa wasn't just about flags and anthems.
Right.
It was also about reclaiming control.
Absolutely.
Over vital resources.
That's an essential aspect that often gets overlooked. You know, we're talking about resources like diamonds, gold, oil, resources that had been systematically exploited for the benefit of colonial economies. Decolonization was about African nations taking control of their own economic destinies.
So it was about economic justice as much as it was about political freedom.
Absolutely. It was about nations having the right to determine how their own resources were used, how their own economies were structured.
And that brings us back to the idea that decolonization is this multifaceted process.
It is.
Touching every aspect of a society.
Exactly. It forces a reassessment of values, a redefinition of identity, a reimagining of what's possible for a nation and its people.
So we've talked about Asia and Africa. What about the Americas and the Caribbean? Their experience with decolonization had its own kind of unique characteristics, didn't it?
It certainly did. In the Americas, the legacy of colonialism is much older, you know, going back centuries. And it involved a more complex interplay of indigenous populations, European powers, and the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade.
One of our sources mentioned Haiti, which achieved independence in 1804, after a successful slave revolt.
It's remarkable.
That's a truly remarkable story.
It is. Haiti's revolution was a watershed moment. You know, a powerful testament to the human desire for freedom and self-determination. It was a beacon of hope for those struggling against oppression, not just in the Caribbean, but around the world.
And it really challenged
the
very foundations of colonial power, didn't it?
Absolutely.
I mean, here you had a nation founded by enslaved people who rose up and overthrew their oppressors. It must have sent shockwaves through the colonial world.
It absolutely did. And while many Latin American countries gained independence in the 19th century, the struggle for true decolonization continued well into the 20th century.
Oh, wow.
You know, the focus shifted to addressing issues of economic dependence, racial inequality, and the lasting impact of cultural erasure.
So even though political independence had been achieved, the battle to dismantle the deeply ingrained structures and mentalities of colonialism was far from over.
That's a crucial point. And it's a battle that continues to this day in many parts of the world. You know, take, for example, the struggle for self-determination in places like Western Sahara or Palestine. These are places where the legacy of colonialism and ongoing conflicts create incredibly complex challenges.
It really drives home the point that
it does.
Decolonization isn't just a chapter in a history book. It's a living process, unfolding in different ways all over the globe.
And understanding those diverse experiences, the different paths taken, the challenges faced, the victories won, and the ongoing struggles is essential to grasping the complexities of decolonization. It's not a monolithic event, but a multifaceted, ever-evolving process with varying timelines, methods, and outcomes.
I feel like as we navigate this vast landscape of decolonization, the importance of self-determination keeps surfacing as like a central theme.
Rightfully so. Self-determination is the driving force behind these movements.
Yeah.
It's about reclaiming the agency to shape one's own destiny, free from external control or manipulation.
But achieving genuine self-determination
Yeah.
isn't a simple task.
It's not.
It's not just about declaring independence or changing flags.
Exactly. It requires a much deeper and more fundamental transformation. It involves dismantling colonial mindsets.
Okay.
Challenging entrenched power structures,
Right.
and addressing the economic, social, and cultural legacies of colonialism.
Right.
It's about creating a world where every nation and every people have the right to chart their own course.
And it's clear that this journey toward true self-determination is still unfolding in many parts of the world.
Absolutely.
It's a journey with many twists and turns, setbacks and breakthroughs.
It is, but despite the challenges, the spirit of decolonization, that yearning for freedom, equality, and self-determination, it continues to burn bright. And in our next segment, we'll delve further into the enduring legacy of decolonization and its ongoing relevance in the 21st century.
Okay.
But before we move on, I want to pose a question to you, our listener, as we've been exploring these various decolonization movements.
Yeah.
Have any particular stories resonated with you?
Okay.
And why?
That's a great question to consider as we continue our deep dive.
It is.
We'll be back in a moment to explore the legacy of decolonization and how its echoes can be felt even today. Welcome back to our deep dive into decolonization.
Back again.
We've journeyed through history across continents, explored the complexities of this global movement.
Sure.
And now I'm really interested in digging into the legacy of decolonization.
Okay.
What does it mean for us today in the 21st century?
That's a really crucial question. It's easy to think about decolonization as something that happened way back when.
Right.
But the reality is its effects are still deeply felt around the world.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen that it's not just about achieving political independence. It's about this much broader, deeper process of reclaiming history, culture, identity, economic control.
Right.
It's about dismantling those systems of oppression and those dominant narratives that were imposed during colonial rule.
And it's a process that's far from finished, right?
It is.
I mean, we talked about some of those ongoing struggles in places like Western Sahara, Palestine.
Yes.
But even in countries that gained their independence decades ago, those legacies of colonialism are still present.
They are.
In so many ways.
Absolutely. Many former colonies continue to grapple with the after effects of colonialism from, economic inequality and political instability to the lasting impact of cultural erasure.
Okay.
And even in countries that haven't experienced direct colonial rule, the echoes of colonialism can be seen in global power dynamics, cultural representations, systemic inequalities.
So how do we even begin to unpack all of that?
Right.
It feels like colonialism cast such a long shadow.
It did.
One that's difficult to fully escape.
It's true. The legacy of colonialism is complex and multifaceted.
Yeah.
But I think one of the most valuable things we can do is shift our perspective.
Okay.
Decolonization as a concept and as a movement continues to evolve. It's no longer confined to that historical context of the 20th century.
Okay.
It's become this lens through which we can examine and challenge power structures, inequalities, dominant narratives in all aspects of our lives.
So it's like decolonization has become a verb, an action, a way of seeing the world and interacting with it differently.
Exactly. It's about constantly questioning, challenging, and dismantling those colonial legacies that persist in our institutions, our cultures, even in our own thinking. And a key part of that is what we call decolonizing knowledge.
Okay, I've heard that phrase before.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure I totally understand it.
Sure.
Can you explain what it means to decolonize knowledge?
Think of it this way. For centuries, knowledge production has been dominated by a particular worldview.
Okay.
Largely shaped by European colonialism.
Okay.
That means that the information we receive, the stories we're told, the way we understand the world, has been filtered through that particular lens.
So it's like we've been given this very specific set of glasses to view the world through. And those glasses have been shaped by colonial perspectives.
That's a great analogy. And decolonizing knowledge is about taking off those glasses, recognizing that they exist, and seeking out different perspectives, different ways of knowing, different sources of information.
So it's about diversifying what we read, what we watch, who we listen to, right? It's about actively seeking out those voices and perspectives that have been marginalized or silenced by those dominant narratives.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that knowledge production has historically been unequal.
Right.
And true understanding requires a more inclusive and multifaceted approach. It's about challenging Eurocentric perspectives and amplifying the voices and experiences of those who've been historically marginalized.
So decolonizing knowledge, it sounds like a pretty radical idea.
I can see why you think that.
Almost like rewriting history. Or rejecting certain perspectives altogether?
It's not about erasing history or rejecting certain perspectives outright. You know, it's about creating space for multiple narratives, acknowledging different ways of knowing, and fostering a more critical and nuanced understanding of the world. It's about adding to the conversation, not shutting it down.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like expanding our understanding of the world. Right. Recognizing that there are many different ways of knowing and being.
Yes.
Rather than just accepting that one dominant narrative as the truth.
Precisely. And that brings us to the question of individual responsibility.
Okay.
What role can we play in this ongoing process of decolonization? Right. It's not just about academics or activists. You know, it's something we can all engage with in our own lives.
So how do we do that?
Yeah.
What can we do as individuals to contribute to decolonization?
It starts with self-reflection.
Okay.
You know, we need to examine our own biases, assumptions, and privileges.
Okay.
We need to ask ourselves how we might be complicit in perpetuating systems of oppression or, you know, benefiting from historical injustices.
It's about like looking inward first.
Yeah.
Recognizing our own place within these systems and structures that have been shaped by colonialism.
Right. And it's about becoming aware of the power dynamics that shape our interactions.
Okay.
The language we use, the stories we tell, and the choices we make. It's about actively challenging prejudice, discrimination, and inequality in our own spheres of influence.
So it sounds like it's about recognizing that decolonization isn't just this like theoretical concept.
It's not.
But something that we need to actively engage with in our daily lives.
Absolutely. And it's about recognizing that decolonization is a lived experience for many people around the world. It's about solidarity, allyship, and a commitment to creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
So where do we go from here?
Yeah.
What are some concrete things we can do to put these ideas into action?
We can start by educating ourselves about the history and ongoing legacies of colonialism, its impact on different parts of the world, and how it continues to shape the present. You know, we can read books and articles from a variety of perspectives, watch documentaries, listen to podcasts, and engage in meaningful conversations with people from different backgrounds.
And being mindful of the language we use.
Yes.
The images we consume, the stories we choose to tell.
Absolutely.
It's about challenging those harmful stereotypes and narratives that perpetuate inequality.
It is.
Yeah.
And we can advocate for policies that promote economic fairness and opportunity for all. We can support businesses and organizations that are committed to ethical and sustainable practices. And perhaps most importantly, we can practice empathy and compassion in our interactions with others, recognizing that everyone has a story to tell and a unique perspective to share.
That's such an important point.
It is.
It's about recognizing the humanity in everyone.
It is.
Regardless of their background or their experiences.
Exactly.
It's about creating a world where everyone feels valued and respected.
And that's what makes this journey of decolonization so important.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just about righting past wrongs. It's about creating a more just and equitable future for all.
This deep dive into decolonization has been quite a journey for me. We've uncovered the complexities of this global movement, explored its triumphs and struggles, and grappled with its enduring legacy.
It is enduring.
It is.
And I hope it's been a journey for you too, our listener. We've seen how decolonization challenges us to think critically about history, power, and our place in the world. It calls us to action, to engage in the ongoing process of creating a more just and equitable future. And as we conclude this deep dive, we leave you with this thought. How can you contribute to the decolonization of your own mind, your community, and the world around you? The journey continues, and each step we take towards greater awareness, empathy, and action brings us closer to a truly decolonized world.